Good evening. My name is Will Smith. I'm a bookseller at Sam Reed's Bookshop in Grasmere, a small independent bookshop in the middle of the Lake District, and I'm delighted that we're able to host this evening an event to celebrate the publication of Robin McLean's Pity the Beast. This is just been published with And Other Stories, and we are in an amazing position this evening in that not only do we have Robin zooming in from California, we also have Cynan Jones here to speak to Robin, and therefore we can host this wonderful writer-to-writer conversation. I should also show, being a bookseller, the book itself we're going to talk about this evening. There we are. That's the UK edition of Pity the Beast in its beautiful, beautiful dust jacket there. And this is one of a number of events we've been putting on over the last year, and we're so grateful to have an online audience for those events. As a part of the event, we have the chat box here, which during the event you can enter questions into, and we will pick up as the event allows. Towards the end of the conversation, we'll be taking public questions. And it's also worth saying that if you haven't got a copy of Pity the Beast yet, you can, of course, buy it online from Sam Reed's or from your local independent bookshop, or from bookshop.org. Whoever your preferred purveyor of books is, do ask them about it, and they should be only too willing to provide it to you. So this evening, I'm just delighted that we could be running this. Thanks so much to Stefan and Nikki and Other Stories for enabling this event. Tonight, our host is Cynan Jones, who is himself an award-winning novelist, short story writer, has written for The New Yorker, has had stories published by Granta, has also written 3 tales for children and a screenplay. I won't go on listing the achievements here, but it's fair to say that he is a well-known figure on UK bookshelves, and we are so delighted to have him here as host this evening. And he will be talking to Robin McLean, who has just published Pity the Beast. But I'll hand over to Cynan, and he'll be a better interlocutor for this conversation.
You had to make sure that you'd finish there. It said the host is refusing to unmute you. So no, thank you for that, Will. And it really is a pleasure to do this. Usually I'm on a very different side of this conversation, but Pity the Beast did rattle me significantly enough to want to really understand the person behind the writing, behind the book. And actually, I think that's what we're going to do this evening. We're going to let that person and myself, as it were, interlocute, and rather than list the significant number of different things that Robin has done that have built her into the person capable of pitying the beast at the end of it, I think one thing to mention more than anything that really struck me is that you currently live in Ike's Canyon Ranch, which is desert. Which fascinates me. When you meet that with another part of your biography, as I saw it, and let me read this out. You're a figure skater first, and having learned to skate and walk at the same time, and you believe that crashing on ice has prepared you to write fiction. So I think that's a great place to start the conversation. Can you talk about that, please? It's Will and the God complex. There we go. Good.
Thank you, Will. Hi, Cynan. Hi, Will. Hello, UK. I'm just thrilled to be here with you. And I'll start out with a little skating talk, I guess. I've told people that everything about me I could explain from being a figure skater. I learned how to skate at the same time that I learned how to walk. I cannot remember not being able to figure skate fast and glide. And they say that skating is the closest thing to outer space as far as anti-friction. Swimming is for zero gravity, but you have to fall and fall and fall and fall in order to reach this skill level with your body and with your mind to reach this ability to jump and spin, which is an ecstatic feeling. And it's a feeling that comes through practice and, like I said, falling on your ass many, many, many times. And for me, fiction is really hard. This book was an adventure. It was an exploration. And a lot of the times I didn't really know what I was doing. I was proceeding on through the story. The line of the story has a very, very straightforward story in the middle of a pretty elaborate wildness to it. And for me, skating gave me probably the tenacity to struggle on when you have a lot of failing days as a writer. I was a potter after that, spinning the clay. So there's something about spinning, but pottery is also a field where you fail a lot, things break. Your friends come over and something's broken and they feel really, really sad about it. And you say, oh no, don't worry. there's more. But yeah, so I feel like with skating is the joy of this difficult thing that can arrive through long, patient effort, thousands and thousands of days, thousands of hours, thousands of falls. So that's what skating got me, we arrive at a beautiful book. I don't know, I think it's a beautiful book. I have a beautiful press that made it into a beautiful book. So yeah, here we are.
So for those, this is just very, very fresh in the UK, and most of you probably won't have had the pleasure of reading Pity the Beast yet. So we're not going to give you too many spoilers, but it is an awesome book in regards its scale, just the setting of it, I guess. One thing that was visceral on the page for me was the elemental aspect of it, and you just talked about ice and your connection with that as an elemental material, and about pottery connecting, if you like, again with this elemental material. So my question, I guess, is what drew you to write Pity the Beast? Was it, I know you've talked about finding your way through the story, but was it the landscape that came first? Was it the people, or was it the story, or is it a combination of those things? Right. Sorry. Well, every time you do that, we're having a pound in the equivalent of the swear box.
No, I'm in Southern California, and it's perfectly quiet here except for this guy just came by with a mowing machine. So I turned off my sound so that you guys wouldn't hear that. I apologize. So the way I always start stories is some story that I hear or I learn or I think about and that sticks in my mind for a long time. So there's a initiating story in this book. It was originally a long short story. It arose from a story that I learned in Alaska of a friend who was called to a neighbor's because this horse, this small mare was impregnated by a really big horse from the house next door. And the entire community came to try to save this horse when she was in labor. And they're being Alaskans, they're rural people who are very clever, as you know, Cynan, and very devoted to the animals that they care about. And they went to great efforts to help this horse. And I was fascinated by the story. It just stuck in my mind and it wouldn't go away. And that's usually how my stories start, if I have to deal with it to understand both the story itself and why I'm fascinated by it. And then Alaska is a very intense physical place. You feel real small in Alaska. I prefer places where the human feels small, where there's other beings around that are intact, intact ecosystems where the animals are just as have just as much as autonomy as I do or more. And so the combination between this sort of heroic rural story, which I admire, that sort of cleverness and the commitment of the rural people, I know as you do. I moved it to the Northern Rockies because I realized I was dealing with sort of horses and livestock, and actually that's not kind of a thing in Alaska. There aren't really that many horses there. So in order to make it into a Western, which I realized I had potential to make into Western, I moved it to the Northern Rockies, which is another powerful place where I've lived, where the mountains and the landscape are bigger than humans. And I'm really interested in the sort of humility that those kinds of places have inspired in me, and that I think that they've been sort of silenced, people think of them as far off places that you go visit, whereas I've lived in them pretty consistently all of my adult life. And there's something that I want to translate about my life through my writing, certainly in this book.
I mean, and there is also that authenticity on the page. There's an inhabiting of the space, but it comes through in the microcosm that, as you said, the people are relegated really, and there's this huge landscape out there. So they're just operating their own small universes within it. And that really comes through in it's the physical writing. We know people through the things that they do. So in that regard, the authenticity, I think in the short story collection, The Reptile House, there's, in the first story, the line, an axe split, or a wood split with the tap of an axe, or something like that. Yep. So only having done something like trying to split wood in freezing cold temperatures, do you know that you only need to tap it. Can you tell us a little bit about your everyday life, not the writing, not the plot, just how you go about it and where those observations have grown from?
Well, when you live in places where nature is more powerful than you, then your day is oriented around very simple things. In Alaska, where it's very, very cold, you know that you need to split your wood when it's very, very cold. And that's something that will save you a lot of time. You wait till it's 20 below zero. I don't know what that is in Celsius, but very, very cold, and it becomes quite easy, and you're sweating outside. People play games with the cold where they'll throw hot water into the air at sub-zero temperatures and it evaporates. It's magic. The way the light comes through the atmosphere creates wild optical illusions, and the way you see yourself in this magical world is awe-inspiring. You feel small. Or I lived on a frozen lake in New Hampshire for about 5 winters, where I was the only one living on this little island. And this is where I started the book, actually. And I would just go out on the lake with my dog snowshoeing, and there were people out there, as you know from one of the stories from Reptile House, there are people out ice fishing. And one time we were coming onto shore, and one of my snowshoes just went straight through the ice, and my dog sat down and waited, and I slowly withdrew my foot and backed away and went around. But that would have been it. If both of my snowshoes went down, I would have been gone, and my dog would have waited, and but there's just miraculous life and death things that happen all the time if you live in places that are away from humans. I've been run over by a moose. I've been run over by a cow. I've had rattlesnakes go by my feet. So you just feel like you have to pay attention. In my opinion, you have to keep your eyes open and pay attention, and hopefully that translates into my writing.
I mean, certainly does in Pity the Beast, because they are, as I said, most of the characters are very much at the mercy of those things they have to just do. But there's somebody who cuts a trail again. So I want to talk about two other things. As someone who has historically has cut a trail. Now, when you said that you were trying to find the story, that you were following the story, the old Swede, who's the person who's built this trail, it strikes me that that character is someone that you potentially befriended during the writing. I mean, you've talked about the attritional, difficult process that is writing really well. So was this character from the historical element of the novel kind of guiding you or tricking you or leading you down dead ends? What was his role?
Well, the old Swede, so the characters in the book go into the mountains on sort of a chase, a hunt, a search, depending on who you are, what you think you're doing, because the characters probably would all answer that differently. But they follow what's called the Old Swedes Trail, which is a trail that goes up into the mountains. So you have identified that the old Swede was definitely a friend of mine while I was writing this book. There's a lot of things that were quite difficult for me to write about. And the old Swede is a sort of a kindly presence for me, somebody who makes a trail. He's thinking about the future. He's being kind to the future. Hopefully that's what novelists do, thinking about the future a little bit. He's also a pretty complicated figure because he is sort of the quintessential American myth story of somebody coming from Europe and going west and building the trail, sort of a heroic figure in that way, that is also a figure that's being re-examined by history right now. How do we feel about these people who came and borrowed trails that existed before, were made by indigenous people or other beings besides humans at all, and then the name is placed, whatever the identity of that place, that trail disappears and it becomes the old Swede. So he also represents for me the complicated nature of American history, which of course I'm really interested in this book. I'm really interested in the American myth versus this discussion of what is actually true about American history versus what we like to think is true as Americans, and this heroic view, whether that's the old Swede or John Wayne or this myth that is very, very deeply embedded in the American mind. And I would argue almost anyone wearing Levi's and a cowboy hat anywhere on the planet is to some degree ingested both the good side and the bad side of the old Swede at all. Like everyone in this story kind of fits into, I found at some point, some aspect to that American myth story, whether or not they are going against it. Some of them are, pushing back against it. They found that they are no longer a good guy in the American myth. And so how do you operate if you're no longer the good guy in the American myth? So yeah, the old Swede is, for me, as are all the characters in Pity the Beast, very complicated, and I love him. And yet I see his complexity also. Hopefully everyone does.
Well, they're real characters because they have that complexity, and it felt to me, say reading it for the first time, that as you mentioned earlier, it started life as a long short story, but it then feels like it's straining. It has that kind of will to create new ground, and very much bringing along with it these myths, these histories. So we've talked about that kind of complexity in every character. There felt to me that there was a kind of conflict of who they thought they were, who they were suddenly expected to be. Some of them commit acts which I'm sure they weren't necessarily believe they could have committed. They're trying to repair those acts or whatever's going on. It also feels, I mean, you said earlier that you're sort of writing a Western, and you've just said something about a book for the future, and it am I right? I'm kind of guessing here just from the process, some of the process I've been through. You start off with a long short story because you've heard about this event with a horse, and you start to play that, and you're walking and you're doing things, you're throwing a pot, and it starts to grow and it starts to accumulate other possibilities. Then you realize you can transport it to somewhere that can make it a Western, with all of the potential constraints that might have come with, and all of the scaffolding that allows you to play with. But there's a point, I feel, that you must have made the decision that the book wasn't enough, that it must have needed to just become huge. So again, no spoilers, but there is this kind of extraordinary other thread in the book from the future. I mean, that is, whoa, that's one of those. That is bold. That's a bold thing to do. So was that, did you do that because there was a constriction and you needed it to explode, for want of a better word, if you like?
I feel like you've been reading my mind. Have you been reading my mind? I guess you've been reading my book. It's the same thing. As you know, writing something enormous, many, many pages long, it's spent a lot of time with that. And for me, one of the things that happened with the initial story, which is a short story, but there's an initiating, at the beginning, one of the characters uses a story as a weapon. And I got real interested in stories as weapons as a result of that. And it started making me think about stories and how they operate for humans. Why are we so interested in stories? Are stories becoming poison now? What is the deal? Like it seemed to me that stories have a utility that have always been there for humans. Myths, fairy tales have been there to help us live as better people within our societies, within our communities, with our families. But I felt like that initiating story got me thinking about whether it doesn't work anymore. And then that started working out in a macro sense through these motifs throughout the book. And then it just felt to me that I needed the book to be bigger, to get out of the straight narrative. Like maybe straight narrative does not do what I want to do with this thought, because I think of a book as a thought. And so we know how, from a writing perspective or craft perspective, how to stretch time that way. If I want to make the book bigger, I can look at history, I can look at geology, I can look at volcanoes and things like that. And we have no trouble going back in time as a thought, say, I want this thought to be 10 million years old. And then people say, sure, okay, no problem. But I say, okay, I want it to go the other direction too. I don't want it to only go back. I want it to go bigger that direction too. And so the sections that you're talking about are an effort for me to demand that the thought is bigger than just these people riding around in the mountains trying to interact with each other as humans do during their lifetimes. I wanted this thought to be bigger than that. And so I pushed it out the other direction too.
It absolutely feels like that. I mean, it's that, for me, it's almost like what you want to try and achieve with it is this mountainous thing, this landscape. And all your story can do is attempt to trying to find its way through it. But because of that, it's constantly in the thrall of the backdrop, and in this case that kind of myth backdrop and the psychology and everything that comes with it. It's probably great for people in the room to can you read a little bit about the mountains, if you like, and perhaps one of the characters, the way that that particular character experiences that world around him.
Yeah, I'm gonna read a little bit. So as everyone knows, if there's writers in the group, which I think there are, I recognize some, fiction writers, humans on our day-to-day basis, we try to avoid trouble. If there's a bear outside, you don't go outside. In fiction, you send your characters straight into trouble. The more trouble, the better. And in this book, there's just trouble, 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 trouble. It gets more trouble, more trouble. And so at one point, there's so much trouble that one of the characters, whose name is Saul, who's a very, very powerful guy who knows how to solve problems, and he's really perplexed. And this is a little section by Saul about what you do when you've got so many problems lined up, you don't know what to do. We've all been in that position. So this is Saul, what Saul would say about that. In short, as I've told Ella, when your life gets all confused, off kilter, and you know you've got nothing to be proud of, mistakes were made, well, step back from the small. For example, we think we see the mountains around us now, don't we? Those peaks, they look so solid. The most real, most immovable objects we can observe or think about in a lifetime. Well, that notion I see now is a lie. Instead of still and solid, those mountains are purest action, crystalline fluid movement. True, they are visible, solid surface, but they also prove their proof of faults intersecting far below, reflecting only the smallest hint of the tumult, the titanic subsurface battles that dwarf any human action, idea, existence. It's a matter of scale and vision. Bowman is big on this. What I think is, to God, a mountain is a liquid wave that breaks over 10 million years, not a tenth of one of his seconds. Can you see the wave now? Not stone at all. The trick to peace of mind, to heaven on earth, to surviving suffering, is to see the mountains as God would. Molten rock caught in an illusion of stillness by the limits of the human retina. I'm trying to say, think big in times of crisis. Just as your mind wants to cave in, move past what you think you can't move past, then think bigger, expand, look onward to the grand scale.
So that actually sounds to me a description of the book as well, in that the book becomes kind of solidified as soon as you pass it to your publisher and they make a thing of it. But obviously the aim is always to have the sense that it's not, that book is still out there moving, like I said, from that, like the mountains are, it's not a solid thing. That being the case, because it's not a solid thing, I began to read that book, and I found myself being almost galloping, being taken along, and had to slow down, had to actually stop. You need to read this more slowly. How hard do you work on rhythm? I mean, I'm really interested in how different writers choose to really battle the prose at the desk, or word by word. Do you work on rhythm very, very hard, or?
That is the kind of question I would expect from you, because I know you do. I know you write for sound, and I also write for sound, and try to take out any word in a line that would make me stumble or slow the line down. I'm an obsessive reviser. There are parts of this book. The sort of a mentor for this book is a writer in the U.S. named Karen Shepard. She's amazing, and she read the book and said, "Oh, I loved the scene at the cabin," which there are a couple scenes, so I don't know which. But I said, "Well, I wrote those scenes about 250 times, so I'm really glad you liked them." And it's really for me, if you can feel comfortable with each line, it almost distracts you from the subject matter in a way to allow the subject matter to develop in a natural way and not circumvented by your editor mind or your conscious mind. So I'm absolutely obsessed with the lines and the rhythm, and I I want people to read the book slowly. I have some friends who are really, really fast readers, and I said, please swear to me that you will not read this book fast. Read it slow. Please read it slow, slow, slow.
I think it's
Yeah.
almost like the bookseller should almost sticker it. Boom, read, slow down, because it's, I mean, coming from a tradition in Wales where some of the writing, some Welsh writing is incredibly wrought, it's incredibly flamboyant, cast out the one most people might know, like Dylan Thomas, the tendency can be to get carried away, and actually it's the opposite. Now, what you just said about that close-up focus on the text itself, allowing you to step away from the characters. One thing, again, that I mentioned it earlier, or referred to it earlier, but that the people watching, if you like, the fact that we all make judgments about people, or we make assumptions about people based on the way that they do a particular thing, the process that they're doing. You write, presumably, and you listen and you watch. Mm-hmm. That's what it feels to me. And you also want to put the reader there so that they have to make their own judgments. In this book, there's some really unsavory stuff goes on. Let's just put it that way. But you're not necessarily judgmental in that at all. Is that something that you have to consciously guard, or have you just answered that by saying, well, no, you're just making them act, and it's up to the reader to feel one way or the other?
Well, I mean, there's different kinds of books, and I think a lot of books, or I guess there's different kinds of writers. A lot of writers will tell the reader what to think about what just happened. And what I've found over time is that if you don't tell the reader what to think about what happened, it could be quite disorienting to them if it's bad, if it's really bad, and you don't say, boy, that was really bad. They're not sure how to take it. And I think that's a really good thing to do, though, because I worry a lot about the world that we live in now. And as a person who lives in a very remote place, so I feel outside of a lot of what I enter into. If I drive into Reno, my blood pressure goes up. It's a really intense thing for me to leave this place where there is not another human except for my partner. There's no other human for at least 20 miles if they're home. There's nobody around. So for me, I'm a canary in the coal mine, but I feel that it is very, very important that humans start looking for themselves, like look around and see what you see and respond to it. And my writing is probably a reflection of that. It can have a really, it can be really shocking for people what I write. I gather, for me, I'm always surprised by that, because I think, well, what do you see different than what I see? I'm looking around and this is what I see. So the style of how I present information, I think I try really hard not to judge the characters, because that would be sort of a full stop for my project. But that requires a lot for me, because I certainly don't condone anything that happens of some pretty bad stuff. And I just end up writing about those things because I guess I think that's what I would like people to do, is open their eyes and look. So it's practicing what I think everybody should do. Nobody's asked me what I think people should do, but I just wrote a book doing it.
Well, I think it's something that certainly that there's a difference between being a witness and being a voyeur. And I think you get writers who choose to be one or the other sometimes, and just allow the reader to witness these things. But in whether you're describing mountains or a physical act, or even potentially speaking in the voice of a horse, or whatever it might be that you're doing, how many times do you fall in your ass, as you would put in skating terms, trying to find exactly the right way to phrase that the sound, the voice, the style that you put those events and those things down in?
And endlessly. I mean, if it's a really important line, you'll rewrite it. this week and then proceed and then realize it's not quite right and return.
So how, when did you go, aha, now this is the overtone of this book, Pity the Beast? Because, you know, reading your short stories, you can chameleon it. You know, you're not somebody who can only write one way. What did you go, I'm just gonna, you know, do a Blood Meridian, that's the one. I'm doing it like that? Or did you have to really wrestle for that?
You know, is there anyone out there who says I'll just write a Blood Meridian? I certainly am not thinking that way. I tend to I live, as you know, really remote. And at this really remote place, I work in a bunker underground. I am into total isolation. I want to knock the world out. I have ingested Cormac McCarthy. He is a huge influence on me, as are, you know, Joy Williams. I mean, this list is long of my, you're on my list now too, can just like let you know.
Which list?
You're on the good list. You're on the good list. But what I try to do is simply try to write what feels correct to me. When I've taught a lot of writing or led workshops and things like that, and I'm against good or bad. What I'm interested in as a practitioner, and this is probably the skater, this is probably the potter, is it right? Is it correct right now? Does it have the effect that I want? Because I don't necessarily think about some specific reader, but I do view writing as this amazing form of communication with strangers over time, past and future. I can be in Leo Tolstoy's mind by opening War and Peace. And so this communal act with a reader is quite miraculous. And so I take that very, very seriously, is that where someone will go with me when they open these pages. But it feels quite private. It just, you know, it's easier to describe with short fiction, because to me, when you're writing a short story, there's a tingle in your body that you feel like an electrical sort of feeling when you've hit the right ending. And so it's much different in a book of this size, which has all these sections and you can't hold it all in your brain at one time. I cannot, which is to me sort of the size of a short story, is how much you can fit in your brain at one time. But I just kept moving between these parts and hoped that the energy moves between the parts and makes the whole, that the energy doesn't flag anywhere, and that the experience for this other person who I don't know and may never know is as interesting as it was for me.
That was going to be one of my questions, is about the writing space. And yeah. I was going to ask whether you were the sort of writer that, it's not a bunker, but I use the phrase the writing bunker. You've clearly got a real bunker, so that's real writing one-upmanship. But with that, it felt to me that, you know, some writers, and this is not a hierarchical thing at all, it's not a good or a bad thing, you can feel some writers looking up from the page to collect what they're putting down. It felt to me, rather, that when I read your work, you took it down somewhere with you. And it was just a kind of, you know, that kind of, it's just me. So that, I think, can present you with an opportunity to really react to your own work. You get, if you're not being disturbed by the rest of the world, then it's just you and it. You've got nowhere to hide, nowhere to escape from that text. And in regards to that, in terms of escape, were there sections of this book that you had to look very hard about a different narrative route that would have got your characters out of some of those situations, or was it always going to be the Swede trail, if you like, that just takes them to this place? Did you have that? No, I can get them out, I can make them redeem them, I can do this, that, and the other.
Oh, I'm not huge on redemption. That's not my cup of tea generally. Um, I think I know what you're asking. For me, the storyline through these mountains was sort of a security blanket. I intended them to go through these mountains, and that way I did not have to make a whole lot of decisions about plot. You would think about plot. They're on horses. They've got this mule train. If you have mountains and mule trains and snowstorms and shortage of food and all that kind of thing, it just provides all kinds of stuff that you can use that proceed to the next scene, the next scene. It's just, that's why I think everyone would want to write a Western, because there's all these cool things that you get to put in there that make it quite easy, or these sort of expected things that, you know, there's going to be a cabin, there's going to be some, you know, someone's going to try to escape. There's just stuff that happens. So I have a professor back from my school days who would think of it like a spine of the back of an animal, or a clothesline that you hang the story off of this. And so that Western, that movement through the mountains was, you know, you just have it there and you don't even have to worry about it. And then you can think about these other things that are interesting, like how is narrative operating for this character and this character, and sort of allow the thought or the thing that's interesting to me or the exploration of the story to spin out in my bunker. So yeah.
And okay, with the sort of in danger of sounding provocative, so you write in a bunker, but it strikes me that most of everything I've read of yours, and it's not everything, unfortunately, it's catastrophe. There is catastrophe, which again, I think, and you've answered this question in many ways about the way that you're needing people to think, to open their eyes, to think, to challenge people, whether that's somebody having to, you know, survive a cold snap, or a taxi driver taking soldiers somewhere, whatever it is. There's a kind of level of catastrophe there. Now, do you see this is catastrophic in the most epic, extraordinary, beautiful, engaging sense. Would you say that some of the catastrophes that you've worked on in short form, are they kind of not practice runs as such, but are they building your writing muscles to allow you to write Pity the Beast? Is it only now you could have written it, or is it something that you could have done years ago?
No, I definitely couldn't. A lot of people start with novels. I've never understood how people can do that, because as a short fiction writer, and there's another book coming out for you from And Other Stories, just saying, in a while, my second collection of stories, but more catastrophe, just, you know, letting you know. But for me, I think a lot about how one achieves what they're trying to write. And we read these great books and they look so easy, and we read great stories and they look really easy, but how to accomplish what the writer was trying to accomplish is mind-bogglingly difficult. And so for me, short fiction helps me resolve problems, learn how to resolve problems of craft. Each story presents some problem that you workshop with your friends, you take to workshops, you change the ending 5 times. But each time you do that, you become aware of some thing to do. As some of my friends know, who are my beloved writing buddies, I am one who, if somebody's got something that's going wrong in their draft, they often will call me up and I say, oh, I know how to fix that. And my editor And Other Stories is a genius at this too. He helped me so much with some things that need to be worked out. But there's no way I could have written this book before I did. And so when I had written the short story, I was encouraged to keep it going as a novel. but I had absolutely no idea how to do that. So what I did was I left it alone and wrote about 12 short stories for a few years and then returned to it. And it was the time where I could manage it, but there's no way I could have done it before. So the next novel that I write will benefit from this book, which I'm glad yeah, I mean, boldness is, to me, what a writer should be. A writer should be bold. A writer should be pushing themselves, because it is an exploration of yourself while you're here on planet Earth. And so I would like my next book to be bolder, more go deeper down than this one.
Basically, not know how to do it again. And
Yes.
yeah,
Yes.
I mean, that's a really important, I think it's a really important thing for people when you're teaching, which you do, is to get people to acknowledge that those great books were not easy answers that people just decided to go and put down. I think we're probably ready for some questions from those who've joined us. Has anybody got anything? Has anyone sent something through to Will? There we go. Well, I'll keep an eye on the chat box. And meanwhile, I'd like to ask you too about this is a bit more of a sort of tricky one in terms of where you see writing in relation to the rest of your life. Because I think the other thing that happens when you hear writers speaking is that the people outside assume that, oh, well, that's what they do. They just live in their bunker and, you know, go into town once every 3 months for some supplies. And I mean, you're presumably also very busy. Most writers I know are very busy people as well. So in that regard, do you feel that being busy, having to do other things, helps inform the writing process, creates a structure for it, or is it distracting? You know, do you really kick against it?
Well, I mean, one must get material from from living, and you know, a story that might strike you as very potent and interesting 10 years ago, you know, if you're living in New Hampshire and then you move to Nevada, where there are cowboys riding around herding cows and things like that, you can say, all right, this is what I want to work on now. While I was working on this book, I was teaching adjuncting at a university, you know, where you're helping other people write. And, you know, a lot of that work is considered the lowest work in the United States, to teach, you know, English composition to first-year college students and things like that. For me, I learned so much from dealing with people who are struggling with how to make a sentence perfect or how to express a thought. And, you know, I mean, I just think you live, and a writer their job is to look around and watch and pay attention and make something of it. So yeah, I think I would like to be writing all the time, but it just doesn't work like that for me.
And it can happen that you can see a writer then suddenly disappear up an ivory tower at a certain point of success, and then they start writing irrelevant stories. We've got a question from Polly, actually, and she'd like you to talk about the role of humor in Pity the Beast.
Well, I think all of my work is really hilarious. And I think there's some bad things that happen in this book, Polly. There's some bad things that happen. I'll just tell you right there. There's some bad stuff. And to me, humor is one of the ways to accomplish that examination, because if only bad stuff happened without any mitigating influences in the text, maybe people would stop reading, or on a craft level, maybe the characters would be unrealistic, because to me, pure evil, just as pure good, I'm not a believer in that. I'm a believer in the mixed bag. And the characters, for whatever reason in my work, tend to do really bad stuff. They just tend to. And so humor is extremely useful to me. And in this particular book, if you ever have hung out around, well, cowboys are pretty funny. They're pretty funny. They're really smart, and they tell a lot of jokes, and they disagree with each other all the time. And you can use that kind of real life lightness to accomplish examinations of the opposite. So I'm interested in opposites: humor, death, humor, throw it together.
Yeah. I mean, it's very much for me a book about survival, isn't it? And humor's a survival tool. And I think there's also, I mean, I'm not sure if I was supposed to find it funny, but I found Granny, that there's a voice, this sort of voice from a granny who's full of advice, and it's just brilliantly dry and quite sinister in many ways. But I know people like that, so there's certainly this incredible survival mechanism in that. So talking of survival mechanisms, Katie has asked. Katie's a writer, and she said you've talked about your next book benefiting from Pity the Beast, but are you working on something already, or do you need a fallow period in between? How do you cleanse yourself of one idea in order to move on to the next?
That's a great question, Katie. I'm sure everyone is different. Every writer does everything different, as you probably know. For me, once I'm done with a book, usually something pops up right away. So my next collection of stories is the one that arose in the middle of writing this book. But yeah, I was working on basically 2 novels, and I worked on I worked on a screenplay last year of one of the stories from my first collection, which is called Cold Snap. To me, I like to be working on something, and so yeah, I'm working on multiple stuff. Not right now, because I'm talking to you guys and driving around in a horse trailer in California, and hopefully keep going. But I'll get back to probably another novel, because the novel was something that felt out of my size range, as I mentioned, and then I did write one, as you know. It exists right here, and the possibilities of that size are now evident to me, which I did not really get before. So I'm now kind of interested in trying it again. So.
And would you say that, as you kind of know, and I heard Karis Davis talking about West, those of you that have not seen that, but that, again, that started off as a short story, and then it became a long short story, and then she sort of signed it off. And then what you were saying right at the beginning, which I want to come back to, is those stories that won't go away, the people helping the horse, the people helping the horse, the people helping the horse, people, and then you develop it. I mean, she developed it into West, of course, because it wouldn't go away after several years. Do you, going back to that question about knowing whether you're a grown-up enough writer to handle something or not, are there ideas out there that you want, that haven't gone away, that you feel you're still way too infant, if you like, as a writer to try and contemplate? And if you are you going to deliberately write certain stories to try and build the ways of writing this bigger idea?
I have all kinds of detritus, partial stories that could not I could not grasp them. So they're sitting off to the side. And I feel that what will happen is, as I keep working, if I feel I'm now ready for that one, it'll just pop back into my mind, or it'll integrate into something. I often think of writing a book as sort of making a puzzle that's upside down, so you can't see the picture, and you have to make the pieces. And that there might be a puzzle piece that you really, really think you ought to be able to drop in, but you can't see where to put it. And then the pieces go together, and then you find this place, and previously it was not possible for you to put the piece in. So I feel like some of those things will drop in and some of them will float away. But the capacity to do what you want, what to express, what you want to express, is learned, and it's arrived at through skill and practice and a lot of reading and admiring how other people achieve what they're trying to achieve. And so hopefully some of that stuff will pop back in, but I cannot guarantee anything.
You're blown. You've written that book now. You've written Pity the Beast. That's it. It's downhill. No. Another question that it's really steeped in the landscape. This is another question. Do you think particularity of place will continue to be important for you in your work?
I would imagine so. I mean, I have written stories that take place in a restaurant or, as you know, on a bus. So it's not, although a bus is a particular place and a restaurant is a particular place, I do think that place is shorthand. You know, you rely on the reader heavily to bring what they know, if you're me, because I'm not going to tell them what to think, I hope. So place is just massively informative. It's massively informative, and it's shorthand, and it's evocative, and hopefully makes people pay attention to place, which of course I'm interested in people paying not only attention to their own place, but the entire place that we live, planet Earth, everything that's on this beautiful planet. So yeah, I would imagine that it's in there. It's too effective not to use place.
So, I mean, there's a fantastic line in one of the, I just found it here, in one of these stories in the Reptile House. It goes to show one thing sure, the greatest, grandest things on earth are nothing at all until some man comes along, points it out and says, hey, looky here. Now, obviously there's lots of different sides to that. But do you feel that there is a drive for you to do that, and to talk about the human dish, to point it out? You know, is that because you were a lawyer as well, which obviously I imagine put you into all sorts of situations where you had to make calls on that sort of thing. So is that in the stories as well, that kind of grabbing someone by the shirts and going, look, watch?
Well, my sister is on this Zoom, and she would know that I'm kind of pushy. I'm kind of a pushy person, very opinionated, and love to tell everybody what I think. I think that's an artist's job, is to, I mean, that line from the Carlsbad Cavern story in Reptile House is ironic because it's a man and I'm not a man, and I'm interested that I'm not a man and that I have something to say as a woman that is exploratory. That's a story about exploration, about finding something that no one has ever seen before. And it is kind of crazy to claim that for yourself, but that is what an artist's job is, to claim, I see something that you guys should look at. And yeah, so I think it's easier to do that when you're alone and you don't realize how arrogant that seems. You can be arrogant alone. But yeah, I definitely feel that is what I'm doing. I have something to say. I was a activist. I was a very, very pain in the butt activist in Alaska. It's a place with a lot of environmental dispute going on, and I got very involved in that. And I'm not going to do that, you know, because George Orwell told me not to in the way I write, but I'm going to do it in the way I write, I guess.
Yeah,
I want the world to listen to some stuff.
and that ties in with the right story at the right time, and what drives you, and that you're not arrogant. If you live in a bunker and you're under a rock, you don't. That's not arrogance. That's just you're misguided. It's okay. It's not. So somebody's asked, Tara's asked, speaking about writing the right story at the right time, can you talk to us about reading the right story at the right time, and what are the books that landed in your lap at the exact moment you needed them most?
Well, boy, there are many of them. Joy Williams, The Changeling, if you don't know that book, find that one. Don DeLillo, White Noise. I had heard that one for years and years and thought, oh, everyone's talking about that book, so I don't really need to read it because I'm sure it's just what everybody is talking about. I don't know, there's so many. As I Lay Dying, I don't know, your books remind me of that book. Just these people who decided that how they were going to write was more important than, well, what they're writing is important, but how they're writing informs what they're writing, and that you can ignite someone's interest by changing stuff around. Or I don't know, I don't read anything that's bad, pretty much. If I only read good stuff. I would demand that people tell me all the best stuff, and then I read that. And yeah, I'm sorry, but my list is too long. I think about Eudora Welty, Flannery O'Connor, but that's so long ago that I encountered them. I don't know. There's a lot. There's one that everyone should read, that called Ceremony by Leslie Mormon Silko, that blew my mind, and my mind is still blown, and my mind will never not be blown by that book. And there isn't any other book like that book. And so when you see a book like that, you say, I can also write a book that there isn't any other book like, because Leslie Marmon Silko did that with Ceremony. And it enables, you have these people who show you that you do not have to write what anyone else writes. So.
And I don't know if you also have this experience where you really desperate to find that exact book, to land in your lap, and you can't. And then the onus falls on you. Then you think, well, okay, I have to write this book then, because it's not out there. The problem with that, of course, is no template to follow, so it does become a kind of attritional ice skating constantly. But good. Do we have more from anyone on anything that we discussed or process?
Yeah, all quiet.
Yeah, that's good. You said you've stunned them. I think you've the resounding kind of. So where next? You talked about writing a screenplay out of Cold Snap, which is the first story in Reptile House. Did you find when you're working on something like Pity the Beast, or indeed some of the short stories, there's a scope in the writing, and you've talked very, very articulately about how you find that style, that exact way of saying a thing for that particular story. Then comes the screenplay, which in many ways is so much more dry and so much more formal. Not in any way detrimental. I'm just saying it's a much different discipline, isn't it? Did you enjoy that sparsity, the fact that you couldn't go off sideways, you had to stick with a line? I mean, what?
Yeah, well, I thought it was going to be super easy. I thought, oh yeah, this is going to be really easy because you just put in a bunch of action, and I thought, oh, no, piece of cake. I actually learned quite a bit about my writing from having to write that screenplay, which I did enjoy. But I started realizing how a lot of the information is sort of embedded in a way that if you have to untangle it in a linear fashion, which is what a screenplay requires, that it required me to enhance or broaden the story out in order to be true to the story, the short story. But I did like it because it makes you think in a different way. It makes you find how to articulate this idea in a different way, which is what I'm always trying to do, is how. And so the screenplay was it's a completely different method. And I've been heard a screenplay is described as a recipe for the crew of a camera, like the crew that's making the movie. And it's just a completely different set of instructions. Whereas in short fiction, as you know, you're trying to compress things and put 3 or 4 pieces of important information into each sentence. You want each sentence to be so full that the reader's mind just fills it all in. And so I had to sort of pull it apart. It was kind of interesting.
Great. Good.
Yeah.
Thank you. And that's it. So, and read it slowly. You know, there is all of that information in those lines, and it's certainly more. I feel that some books are, it is a very clumsy term, but almost musical, in that the more you read them, the more you draw from them. You know, other books that they're more, you read them once and there we go. So yeah, read it slowly, read it many times, read it with a stiff drink or a packet of painkillers or whatever works for you. But it's been an absolute pleasure to speak with you. And we'll hand back to Will.
Thank you. Thank you for those great questions.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much to both of you, to Cynan and to Robin. That's been an incredible joy and delight to listen into your conversation here. I should also just say that Robin has put together a list of books adjacent to Pity the Beast, which you can find on the And Other Stories bookshop.org page. So if you want to, many of them mentioned here, if you want to follow those recommendations up, they are there. Also, I wouldn't be doing my part if I didn't say, if you are stuck for a book, just ask a bookseller. They've always got a good line of them available. And also, And Other Stories, to thank them here this evening, and also to say to follow their list, because there are so many interesting eclectic books being published there. And to thank Stefan and to thank Nikki for putting the event together, but also for everyone here. I hope I speak on behalf of everyone here to thank Cynan and to thank Robin for such a brilliant event this evening. So do take care, and if you have any questions or comments and you'd like to follow up afterwards, do direct them to Sam Reeds and we'll pass them on. Thank you very much. Thank you, Robin.
Thank you.
Good night.
Bye, Cynan.